Welcome to Signal Black, a Darker Days series introducing and exploring numerous Chronicles of Darkness 2nd Edition settings currently developed by Onyx Path Publishing. In this series, the hosts of Dark Days, along with some Onyx Path writers, will discuss the settings and basic mechanics of each game, highlight the types of characters you can play, and explore the role-playing experiences each game provides. I'm going to be one of your hosts here, Mike, normally from Dark Days Radio, and also joining me is Chris. How's it going?
Hello. Hi. Yeah, I'm good. It's good to start this new series. It's a new year. It's a good time to dive into Chronicles of Darkness, given that Hunter the Reckoning... wrong version. We already get this wrong. Hunter the Vigil 2nd Edition is out to backers and so forth. I think I'm just waiting on getting the hard copy when that's available. So yeah, it's a good time to get back into these games, I feel. And we've got a guest with us, haven't we, Mike?
We do, and that is Sam Young, who has written on several Chronicles of Darkness game lines. Sam, how's it going? Nice to have you here. Do you want to introduce yourself and give some of your street cred?
Yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm Sam. I've written lots. I can't remember the exact number right now of Chronicles of Darkness stuff. I did Werewolf the Pack, Night Horrors The Tormented, Night Horrors Enemy Action, Night Horrors Spilled Blood, Night Horrors The Serial. I've done a lot of Night Horrors, so if they ever do more Night Horrors, I'd really like to get in on that to kind of fulfill the quad factor I guess at this point. But I have also done a lot of Storyteller's Vault, Vampire the Requiem stuff, primarily updating the old clan books into 2nd edition, amongst other things. Basically kind of going through bloodline by bloodline and bringing them into the new edition. That's sort of where I'm at. I am the Chronicles of Darkness guy in my friend group. The Vampire the Requiem guy online, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome, especially because you have so much expertise in Vampire the Requiem, and that is going to be the main feature here tonight on Signal Black. But before we get into what Vampire the Requiem is, we're just going to talk about the Chronicles of Darkness a little bit, because this is kind of serving as an introduction to many of the Chronicles of Darkness games. So we want to explain some of the basics of it. So, Chronicles of Darkness is a premier horror role-playing setting that was originally released in 2004 under the title World of Darkness. It's an evolution from classic horror role-playing games of the 1990s, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and it quickly developed into its own mysterious setting. In Chronicles of Darkness, you play characters in a world that's just like our own, a modern era with the same countries, same fashions, and the same struggles. But underneath the facade of normality lurk creatures of the unknown, subtle magic beyond comprehension, and sinister mortals seeking to use this magic for their own selfish desires. It's in this dangerous underworld that your mortal characters explore, finding conspiracies or hauntings, cursed legacies or technostic intrusions. Sometimes your characters might be drawn deeper into the shadows and become creatures themselves, being turned into vampires, unlocking the true sorcery of mages, or even being captured and be turned into one of the wondrous changelings. So it's to that backdrop and to that basic set of game mechanics and set of rules that we have Vampire the Requiem, which had its 2nd edition come out actually several years ago. It's been out for quite some time.
2013, I think.
It's been a little while, but I think we're all excited to talk about it because it made a big splash when it first came out and really set the stage for all the other 2nd edition Chronicles of Darkness games that came out. So why don't we do a bit of a sales pitch as to what Vampire the Requiem is all about. So, just from a basic standpoint, just to start us off, and I'll pass it off to, I think, Sam first, and then maybe Chris to follow up a bit. Vampire is a game about survival in a world of undead politics. And vampires were once humans, but they were killed and embraced by another vampire and brought into the fold. And now, if you're playing one of these vampires in the game, You are a blood-drinking revenant, holding on to the vestiges of humanity while still, of course, feeding off of mortals. So that's basic physiology of it. But Sam, what else would you like to highlight just from a kind of an elevator pitch on Vampire the Requiem?
The line that I often give to people is that you get to be the sexiest loser in the world of darkness. Like you are this beautiful predator of the night. You have the whole world before you, but also how do I put this? You're also beholden to this monster in your brain that wants you to kill and to eat and do what it will. And also there's these people at the top who want to crush you down. You have all the power in the world, but very few places to use it. So, and that's drama, baby. I like to say that Vampire the Requiem is the best sandbox RPG for vampires. Like if you are, regardless of whether you care about the world of darkness, the Chronicles of Darkness, if you pick up this game and you want to play a role-playing game about vampires, this is it. Its setting is enough such that you could pick it up or put it away as much as you like. It has rich lore, but it's also a hands-off approach to that lore, so that you're not always having to contend with it. I don't know if we want to get into kind of the elephant in the room of the differences with Masquerade quite yet, but I think there are some really interesting things that Requiem does better than Masquerade, and Masquerade does things better than Requiem too. But it's kind of about what are you looking for, and if you're looking for a more granular experience that you can really customize to your play style, the kind of horror you want to sell to your players. I think that that's the game for you, and that's more of that's a little longer than an elevator pitch, but.
No, I think that was perfect for an elevator pitch. We just got off on the 13th floor, and that was perfect. All right,
the
Chris.
7th floor.
Okay, Chris, what do you think? What's your elevator pitch?
So I would say that if I was to, I think it's maybe it given recent events with the loss of one of the luminaries of vampire media, which is Anne Rice. I actually think Vampire the Requiem is a better game to emulate if you wanted the Vampire Chronicles, because in the Vampire Chronicles, in that series, Lestat and Louis and etc. Each vampire actually has their own unique set of disciplines. They don't share it through bloodlines in the same way, and so technically there is a lot of diversity in what powers a vampire can manifest. And I think Requiem actually allows that because of the fact that the clans aren't so rigid, the covenants aren't so rigid that you have in it. So as Sam said, it is even more of a sandbox than the precursor in the form of Masquerade. And then the difference stylistically, again, if we consider the precursor, is that Vampire is a game where you're playing these ancient monsters, where you could potentially be playing ancient monsters, or at least you are inheritors of powers from ancient monsters. Yet their knowledge of history is fractured, and there is no monomyth for our vampires. And that injects a lot of mystery into the game, because not all vampires are kindred. So all kindred are vampires, but not all vampires are kindred. And within that context, you can really play some true horror where you as vampires, in fact, seem less monstrous than other monsters out in the world. And in fact, less monstrous than even humans. Because, and we'll get into this, there's such horrible things as there are other types of vampires, and there's the things that are called the Strix. You've got to deal with the fact that there are clans that have come and gone, covenants that have come and gone. It is a melting pot of ideas, and you can take this wonderful core book and go back through even the previous editions, and you can build out from it to create what I would say is your world of darkness. And I use world of darkness in the sense that your game setting is a world of darkness. There is the world of darkness, which is shared by lots of people in lots of media, but you can create your world of darkness for vampires with this game quite easily.
Yeah, that's a great point. So you both kind of mentioned Vampire the Masquerade, and I think that's a very fair thing to bring up now, because that's what a lot of people these days are going to be asking. You know, Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition came out about 3-4 years ago.
Is it that long ago already?
God,
yeah, it is.
My bones are
2018.
turning to ash.
So I think a lot of people would say, hey, there's this new hotness on the street. Why do I want to go with Vampire the Requiem?
Classic.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how much I can personally answer that question, because I'm a bit of a weirdo who likes to just combine both games. I like to use a lot of ideas from Vampire the Masquerade and Vampire the Requiem, combine them, and have like a nice cookies and cream kind of flavor, you know?
Yeah.
Which you can do. And I think you're here on Darker Days Radio, we really like people to grab ideas from a lot of different things and mix and match.
It's nothing like a good mashup.
I love to use certain covenants in my Vampire the Masquerade games most recently, and I think that's a great way to add a lot more variety to that setting. But I want to ask you two, because there's going to be a lot of people watching this who are very familiar with Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. Why should they play Vampire the Requiem? What does it bring to the table? You've already kind of mentioned that with the sandbox features, but what are I guess some of the simplified differences that would attract people to Vampire the Requiem?
I think one thing that I think is a little undersold with Requiem is that the kind of the cliche is, well, you play Masquerade for the setting and you play Requiem for the system. And I think you can play Requiem for the setting, because I think the way it does vampire politics, and we'll talk a bit about this when we get to like the splats and stuff, but the way it does vampire politics is really interesting, because instead of like the format in Masquerade is Sabbat versus Camarilla, or now it's more Anarchs versus Camarilla. In Vampire the Requiem, you have 5 different political factions that are not necessarily fighting each other, but actually serve kind of a particular purpose in running the all-night society. So you have the Invictus, who are the more like aristocratic stereotype vampires, but then you have the Carthians, who are more revolutionary. But it's not just that the Carthians are like, well, we got to take down the Invictus. That might be their big goal in the end. But the Carthians help maintain order in the city. They've got these powers called Carthian law. They make sure that people are following the traditions, and the Invictus is making sure that the wealth is being concentrated where it needs to be. Then you have weirder things like the Circle of the Crone, who are doing blood sorcery, and you always need a good blood sorcerer, right?
Yeah. So we'll get into all these different covenants in a second, just for any new people that are listening to this as their first introduction.
Yeah.
We'll go over a lot of the proper nouns.
Yeah.
But I think that's good to highlight. So basically, broad strokes, the politics are different.
Yeah.
I think the politics is different in a way that allows you to explore things which, in Masquerade, whether they intended or not, have become set in stone. So when I say that is that the typical, if you've played Masquerade, if you don't know Masquerade, fine, you can easily read up on this. There's wonderful wikis. The idea that you have the courtly structure of your night society of vampires, that was introduced pretty much through Chicago by Night and became then considered the norm. Mm-hmm. And in Requiem, you can explore so many different political structures. People always go, Carthians are just communists, they're just anarchs. Actually, they can be a lot of different things. Carthians are just not the status quo. And not the status quo can be many things. Being a revolutionary does not mean you are a good thing for the people.
Right.
A good
Carthian police state is incredibly viable.
Yeah,
and cap Carthians.
And then likewise, the Circle of the Crone are this witch cult, which claims to have a history. Whether you believe those claims or not is another thing. But again, how that manifests depends upon how they want to talk about, like, kind of what kind of mythologies they tie themselves to, because within history there are many vampire myths. Likewise, if you look at the Invictus, they're kind of again, depend upon where in the world you are, they represent a solid kind of feudal hierarchy. But again, that depends where in the world you are. If you're in Japan, what a feudal hierarchy looks like is, again, tainted by the place that you're from. So there is a lot of diversity you can do. And I think, speaking honestly, having written some stuff now officially for Masquerade, I think Masquerade's re-examining that and trying to break open the play pit to allow more of that. But Masquerade has that actually built in. As for setting material, I actually think the beauty about Requiem is that it doesn't have, oh, the end of the world is coming. You can play that. You can have an end of the world of a sort, but actually there are much more. You can have a diversity of stories which range anywhere from bio-horror, because Requiem, through merit of Chronicles of Darkness, leads into technostic horror and technology as the main antagonist in that sense, all the way through your traditional political horror and then mythological horror. So there's the challenge with Requiem then is maybe knowing what you want to run. And I think sometimes knowing what you want to run means you've run the run-of-the-mill type of typical Chronicles and exhausted that and then gone, wait a minute, wouldn't this be really interesting to do? And this game supports those new ideas.
I think one of the strengths of Chronicles of Darkness in general, and I think former Mage developer Dave Brookshaw said this, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the Chronicles of Darkness is very weird. It's a very weird world that people live in that setting. And that's sort of, I think that's kind of the fun of Requiem, is that there's a weirdness you can add to the mix that I think Masquerade lacks. Not that Masquerade can't be weird, but there's a certain unknowable quality that you can really like. You can get into the more Twin Peaksiness of the Chronicles of Darkness, and in Vampire. And I think that's one of its great strengths, is like you can go into this world and be like, I don't know what this is. You can create, weird, like you have weird shadow owls and so on and so forth.
Good stuff. Yeah. So, Chris, did you have something else to follow up on?
I was just going to say, the thing with it is there's definitely, when people go, oh, Masquerade has lots of lore, lots of background material. We're now, let's be honest, we're now, what, 20, you said 2004 was when Chronicles of Darkness came out?
Yep.
Yeah, so we're now, we've got almost 20 years worth of Requiem material. And that has been distilled into this second edition. So there is if you go into it, there is a setting ready to run. There is a world ready to explore at time zero. And you can build out from that and modify it rather easily. So it does have the hints there can be a sort of a meta plot within it, especially if you play the Strix Chronicle, which we will get into a bit more about. But the thing when people say there isn't a setting, that's complete nonsense. That's rubbish. And
I've ranted about this on Twitter.
True for so long.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Good. So, to any new listeners out there, thank you for bearing with us as we tackled that. But it's a very important question, because there is a lot of people that are familiar with Vampire the Masquerade and want to learn more, or are just interested in Vampire the Requiem and what the differences are. So let's go on to discussing what you can play in Vampire the Requiem 2nd Edition. And, coming up for any new people, there's going to be a lot of proper nouns up ahead, but we're going to try to explain all of them in a careful and kind of slow details that people can definitely follow along. And because this is going to be streaming on Twitch and maybe a podcast in the future, you can definitely rewind and go over things if you need to. So, Vampire the Requiem uses 3 concepts to broadly differentiate vampires. First off, there are the clans, which are families that they're embraced into. So if the vampire that embraced you was a Deva, for example, then you will also become a Deva. Following that, there are the covenants, which are political organizations that your vampire character can choose to join. And finally, there are bloodlines, which are optional, kind of refined vampiric families or changes to your vampire physiology that your character can typically choose to join. Now let's cover those clans first, because that's really the one of the basic building blocks here. And there are 5 clans, and each of them play off a different literary archetype for vampires, a different thing you'd see in novels, in films, and I think we can kind of draw some allusions to these different clans to some literary characters as we discuss things. So first off is one that we mentioned, which is the Deva, and these are typically the I guess I would say the more sensual vampires. They can be very refined and predatory in high society, let's say, but they can also have just a lot of heights to their emotions and feelings. And I would say the Deva, one literary link, I think the Anne Rice vampires in many ways usually fall into this. So, like Louis. Louis is a bit of a Deva, if you know what I mean.
The stat when he flies off the handle as well.
Indeed.
Yep. David Bowie in The Hunger.
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah.
Famously in the clan book too.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to mention about the Deva, or any other highlights that Sam you know of? Because I know you and Chris just worked on a
we just
update.
We should do a little plug sin again, Deva.
Yeah, we will plug at the end. Don't worry.
Yeah. The Deva. I've been thinking a lot about the Deva recently. I think sensuality and physicality are the big focus of the Deva, because they've got these powers of social allure, but they, unlike all of the other 4 clans, have 2 physical powers. So they are very oriented towards like strength and speed and beauty, and I have some thoughts about like kind of the way of defining clans is like, it's not really about family, it's about how you hunt, and how you hunt as a Deva is you are beautiful, you are fast, you're strong, you are, and there's so many permutations of what you could do with that.
Is that an update in second edition where they make it more about how they hunt? It's
one of the cool things that they do, and I'll try not to make this too long, is that all of the disciplines, I think, refer to the beast in some way. That the beast is about, this is how you hunt. This tool, it's not about your kindred. If you use powers on your kindred, well, good luck to you. This is how you go and snatch humanity and take their blood. That's a big focus of it. And that's something I really like about that, the way they present that.
Yeah, awesome. I think because if you say about the Deva being sensual and with majesty, obviously commanding people's emotions and the physicality, that it's that they lure people in and then overpower them brutally.
Yeah,
and that's horrific in its own right. Yeah.
And next up for the clans, we have the Gangrel, and their archetype is the much more feral vampire, usually much more bestial in many ways. And for literary influences,
they're not a very literary archetype, are they?
Yeah, that one's a bit tougher. I mean, I think with recent movies, you could definitely go with like the 30 Days of Night vampires.
Yeah.
They'd be Gangrel, for example.
Near Dark is kind of my go-to for Gangrel.
Yeah, that's another great film option right there for inspiration with the Gangrel. Chris and Sam, how do you feel about Gangrel? Is there anything you want to highlight with them?
I mean, obviously the primary thing about them is that they capture the shape shifting element of vampires. So if you look at the Bram Stoker's Dracula film by Francis Ford Coppola, where Dracula turns into a mass of rats, or he turns into a large kind of humanoid bat. Gangrel allow you to play that sort of character while also communing with animals. So in that respect, they are the bestial vampires. And I think the interesting thing with that then is where you take that kin that they have with animals, and maybe that they were best suited to hunt out in the wilderness, and how as a clan they must or have accommodated altering their way of hunting to the modern world, to being within cities.
Go back to the idea about shapeshifting, something I really like to highlight about the difference between the Gangrel in first edition and even Masquerade. That second edition Gangrel, shapeshifting is not just, well, you grow some claws and your eyes turn red. Like, the beast is literally like pouring out of your flesh. You've become this polymorphic thing that can grow a tail and like climb up walls. It's not even, it's like the beast made manifest through your skin. And the shape-shifting of Protean is just, it is the most monstrous of all the powers in New World Vampire. And I think that's a really cool change. And I think I think to go back to Masquerade very briefly, I think it's interesting that that's now how they represent vicissitude in the new edition of that.
Yeah.
I really like that, making it's much more broadly focused as a shape-shifting, like animalistic, the monster in the skin kind of thing.
Nice. Next up, after that, we have the Mechets, which are interesting. They're usually the more kind of spooky, shadowy kinds of vampires. There's a lot of interesting lore with them that I think really stands out. For example, if I remember correctly, they almost go through, some of them almost go through like a mummification process and are kind of turned into vampires later after they've been dead for a little bit, which is some interesting lore that really kind of adds to things. For literary influences,
this is a tough one.
Like it's a tough one, but it's so also just a lot of things could very broadly fit into them. I think like the necroscope, kind of really weird alien vampires could fit in. Not so much from the physicality, but definitely from the kind of mysterious alien nature with how they kind of just gather secrets and the like. I think that could work.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, not so much literary again, but there are two canonical Maquette movies, and it's A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night and Only Lovers Left Alive. I think if you want to find Maquette in media at all, that's the archetype. It's not quite as much the shadowy thing, but it is that psychic energy, weird alienation from humanity thing, particularly A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which is, I think, a really underrated movie. But yeah, those are the Maquette. Those are the ones I have found in my travels.
After that, we have the Nosferatu, which is a pretty obvious one from a film standpoint, what it's referring to. But the Nosferatu are the, I guess you'd say, like the fear vampires in a lot of ways. One of the disciplines is, of course, nightmare, which is very, very strong and psychological in many ways. But the Nosferatu archetype, even more than the Mecca, is definitely the creepy vibes and that sort of thing. One additional vampire that I think you could use as an inspiration for the Nosferatu, which could also be a little bit Ventru as well, would be Radu from the Subspecies series. If anyone's seen that one, oh yeah, check it out. Direct to VHS. It's good stuff. It's good stuff, everyone.
Nice.
But definitely a very creepy vibe of a vampire in the castle on the hill.
Yeah, and Nosferatu are interesting within Requiem because they're not necessarily ugly. They're not necessarily even inhuman looking. They can look quite normal. The difference is that the revulsion that people feel from them is an aura. So they, as they walk by, cats may growl, and the light may, shadows get darker, that type of thing. So it's an aura as well. And I like the fact they're not necessarily the ugly vampires. If anything, that makes them it feels a bit more inclusive, maybe less less exploitative, maybe, of for people in that respect, where you go, oh, they look like lepers, is the typical thing with classic Masquerade, Nosferatu, that kind of idea. So I think in that respect, they're much more interesting to play. And Nightmare is a really novel discipline that when I first read Requiem, I was like, wow, that's cool. That is literally fear weaponized. and that has many different cool powers within it. So they're one of my favorite clans in Requiem.
I think I love the Nosferatu so much. And kind of part of that is Nightmare is such a fascinating. It's not really a very archetypal vampire power. It kind of is unique to Requiem. I mean, vampires do scare things in media and fiction, but it is a really cool, unique part of this setting that they have this fear power, and that's so focused on like. One interesting thing about I'll talk again a little bit about changes from first edition is that they did a version of dementation in the Requiem Ventrue book, and a lot of the changes to Nightmare in second edition, if you kind of look closely, are taken a bit from that, broadening it not just to fear but like gaslighting, giving you delusions and making you believe things that aren't real. And I think that's a really cool. It's really scary. Like it's a really frightening thing. Even more than like the fear of dominate, which is you do things that you don't want to do, but like that you believe things that aren't real. And I think the Nosferatu just really, really beautifully illustrate that kind of horror.
Indeed, the fear of not being able to trust your own mind is
very scary.
Really, really something. But let's move on to the Ventrue. So this is the vampire, either in the castle up on the hill or in the skyscraper above the city, in the penthouse looking down on everyone. Definitely the highly controlling vampire, and in many ways, you could say the gangrel kind of can exhibit the apex predator, but I feel like in a modern capitalist society, the Ventrue can definitely be that way as well.
Two sides of the same coin, I think.
Yeah. Indeed. So, and that literary influence. I think you can divide Dracula 50-50 between Gangrel and Ventrue. I think because he exhibits that kind of, the beast side as well as the refined aristocrat in some ways. So that's a great influence right there. But other things like Dr. John William Polidori's vampire, the vampire, I should say, definitely is a Ventrue just hunting in a local social club.
Lord Riven, yeah.
So anything to say with the Ventrue? I think they're... They're probably the most straightforward.
They're very self-explanatory, as they would like, I think.
Yeah.
I like the thing about I like the Ventrue of animalism. That's an interesting little quirk in them, because I believe in Masquerade they had presence, which is majesty now, and I like the idea they are somewhere it says this in the book. They are lords of men and beasts. Like a Ventrue, if you can walk and you have a brain, it can control you. And I really like that there's just this the Ventrue will to power is another, it's another frightening archetype. And that they have resilience is their other power. And it's just like, you can't kill this thing. It will control your mind. And even if you do break out of that, you can't do anything about it. You can't kill this. It's lived longer than you've even existed. So I think they have some of the best synergy in terms of their powers. I think that's a really good design philosophy about the Requiem clans. Is all their powers tend to go together really well in really interesting combinations.
Yeah.
The other fun thing is that you can quite easily with the Ventrue play the classic archetype of the overly suspicious paranoid vampire that is quite literally digging their claws into the very last bits of power they have to control things, and that externally may look like madness setting in, like delusion setting in, because they see enemies at every corner in every shadow. So they also quite happily cover some of the things that if you were obviously more familiar with Masquerade, they actually do cover kind of the archetypes of, say, Malkavians from that game.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're good fun in that respect.
One thing I really like about the Ventrue is it's not an obvious take on them, but they can kind of do the secret agent, which is more of a maquette thing. But a Ventrue can go around just planting little secret commands in people and just snap his fingers, and suddenly everyone's the Manchurian Candidate. And I think that another really creepy trope about them.
And I think this is a good point to actually say that each one of these clans, if you read through, has an understanding of where they come from, because Masquerade has this. Oh, sorry, not Masquerade. Let's forget that word. Let's say Requiem. Damn it. Requiem has this wonderful, and we've said this before in the podcast as well. Requiem has this really cool notion that the bloodlines of vampires that form clans have converged upon being that clan. So there are many vampires in the world that over history have slowly through Darwinianism and, survival of the fittest, have converged on certain powers, and they identify together as Clan Deva or Clan Ventru. Which is why also we have in Requiem in second edition, we also do get discussions of some lost clans. There are the Akud, there is the Julii, there is the Piavik. Yeah. So that's a really cool concept, I feel, within Requiem, of the idea that there have actually been many different clans through history. And again, they've either been destroyed or they've been fractured and consumed into the other clans, and that adds again that kind of weird fuzziness to the history, because you can then say, well, actually Clan Meket has many creators of the clan.
Yeah.
They just don't know who they are. They all just eventually over history converged upon the same thing, and they got together and went, we're basically the same thing.
Yeah.
And they forgot the history of where they came from. So they went, okay, we identify as a collective. Done.
I think there's a really cool detail. I think it's in the Nosferatu clan book about, the Nosferatu are corpses who rose from the grave, and the myth of the Brothers Worm in Greece and things like that. But they also talk about like First Nations vampires, these things that would also rise from the grave. And this idea that I'm stealing this from someone said this on Twitter, and I'm forgetting who it was. It was a great line about how vampire is just a shape that dead things converge into to prey on the living. And all the clans in one way or another kind of express that. The multiple origin is such a cool way of doing that. This again, it's another way that Requiem is weirder. It's stranger. There's kind of something in the DNA that's making you pushes you towards this thing.
There's actually anthropological theories about something similar to that with human evolution.
Yeah.
We all these different semi-Homo sapiens made the same similar leap in different areas.
Yeah.
Leap in intelligence, I should say.
I was going to say that the one other little detail is that there are the big five clans and there are the lost clans, but there are sort of stranger clans kind of out there in the world doing things, and sometimes it's just variants. Like the Meket have the Hollow, who are generally they're just Meket, but they have this shadow thing that follows them around, this reflection that hates them for dying and rejecting them. But then you have weirder things like I wrote some of these for Spilled Blood. You have things like the Hypatian clan, who are like Promethean vampires, and you have the Twice Cursed, who are they have the curses of the Deva and the Nosferatu, and they tend to kill other vampires. And then there's the Amari, who are like these Arctic vampires who've kind of been destroyed, speaking of evolution, destroyed by climate change and things. So there are other things out there that you can pick up and play. And it's a little more optional, but I think that's kind of a strength of Requiem, is that you can have these weird things out the corners, that these evolutionary dead ends, effectively.
The other good thing, obviously, if we're going to talk about the clans, and let's forget bloodlines, because that's all optional, and all these other dead clans, they're all optional. If you go from the core, the other important thing is that there is no real, what I would say, snowflake disciplines, and at least since first edition, those have been weeded out maybe to a certain extent. Because that was one of the annoying things. Whenever there was a new clan added to Masquerade, there was, at least in the previous editions, V5 has rectified some of this to great effect. There would be a new discipline tree, And you'd be like, but most of those, you look at it and go, really? What is that doing that's different to celerity? What's that doing different to thaumaturgy? Or what's that different to protean? So, and if we consider how we don't have that in Requiem and we just have these 5 clans, for new players to a game about vampires, your choices are actually quite easy to pick from. There are 5 clans. There's a lot of breadth within how you play a character from that clan. But there is 5 options. That makes choices easier. Because remember, the other thing is that clans are, as we said, not family. So this is again something that was reinforced towards the end of Revised Edition of Masquerade. But fuck the clans. Like, you know, a clan does not define you as a person. It does influence how you hunt because of the disciplines. It does have some external influences, but it doesn't mean I'm a gangrel, so therefore I am this.
Yeah. You don't have to like other gangrel. You might actually hate all the other gangrel in the city.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was really good, Sam, that you corrected me before about, you know, the clans not really being families, because the real...
They certainly like to think they are.
Indeed. But the real, like, potentially fraternal aspects of Vampire the Requiem are, of course, the covenants. So a lot of the basic tension in Requiem comes from this kind of political Cold War, which is between the various covenants of the city. And these covenants are basically, you know, they're political structures, which can vary, you know, from city to city. Some cities will have particular covenants be dominant. And as you guys were alluding to earlier in this stream, some of the covenants are going to be very different between different cities, or even different in the same city, which can definitely be very interesting. You know, we can have heresies, for example, within the same city, and those kinds of conflicts. So let's talk about the 5 core covenants that you find in the basic rulebook. Starting off, in alphabetical order, we have the Carthians. So the Carthians are, as you guys were kind of alluding to earlier, usually the more, I don't want to say less structured, but the vampires that want to kind of ensure like particular rights, hunting grounds, and the like in the city.
Anti-status quo is sort of the way to think.
Yeah, correct. So right, they want to typically break down like the old guard aspects of the city and enforce. Well, they can through their strictures kind of enforce laws and the like to help them in their kind of quest in that manner. So Carthians are great if you want your character to be maybe a bit of a renegade, or maybe just kind of a free thinker in the city. But of course, as we were alluding to, I would say typically a Carthian covenant in the city would probably be the most fractious. You know, that would be kind of the default, because you have so many different ideas. They don't necessarily have to be leftist. You could have, I don't know, the distributism Carthian in the city. That one weirdo over there that's waving his orange flag, for example.
I was joking about anarcho-capitalist Carthians earlier, and that is totally a viable play mode.
Totally viable.
Yeah.
They don't have to be an inclusive group whatsoever. They can be radical to this point that they go, we want to change the status quo, which also means ostracizing or you know, ostracizing or basically just having prejudice to a particular group, be it ethnic group, religion, etc. Carthians are not, in that respect then, Carthians are definitely, they share similarity, but they are definitely not by default, they are not the anarchs of Masquerade. They are, Carthians can actually be a lot more scary in some respects. Like the idea you could have a Carthian revolution occur in a city and it become, as Mike said, like more of a police state for the vampires with stricter rules than even what the Invictus or Lancashire Sanctum could come up with is scary.
Right. And that could be a very interesting thing. So we'll talk about Lancashire Sanctum later, but they are the and we'll get into this more, but like
the deep lore,
Christian-ish vampire sect, Christian-inspired vampire
They're
sect,
kind of Christian cosplayers,
or covenant. Yeah, there we go. But what if you had a very strict fundamentalist Christian Parthian
social
sect
gospel
in your city,
Parthians, yeah.
right? So you have these two very similar covenants, at least in a kind of basic veneer, just going at each other's throats, and really just kind of calling each other heretics or blasphemers.
You can
of the
quite
like, which could be
easily,
very interesting.
in that respect, also have members. I mean, looking at that example, that Carthian could actually be a member of the Lancare Sanctum. So you've got this thing that the Lancare Sanctum forms the second estate, the religious arm of what's going on, and but they accept that the Carthians deal with the political running of the city, and you can have that. You can have your Requiem character could be a member of multiple covenants quite happily, so long as the city and politics all balances out, and that's okay. But that's a brilliant point when shit goes down. Your character is caught in the middle.
Yeah.
And they have to make that choice.
I think this is actually in the rule book, and it's even if it's not, it's a brilliant line. Somebody said that Carthians are revolutionaries where humans are the means of production, and I think that's a great way to emphasize. Like this is another thing. The Covenants do emphasize going back to horror. It is this structure of revolutionaries and radicals, and humans are just they're just the blood bags that they need to take down the man, right? Like they don't care about you. They don't care if you're free. They're free. And I think that's a cool. Carthians are not good guys. That's
Yeah. That's an important point to make. So let's move on to the Circle of the Crone. I know, Chris, you've read the Covenant book for this. So
I've read all the Covenant books. If you go back to them, they are dry reading. I will warn people. Dry reading.
I will fight you about the Ordo Dracul one, but yes, I generally agree with that.
But they are are very good reference books for second edition.
Side tangent for people. A lot of the source books are great because you don't need to read them, cover to cover. You can just zero in on the section you're interested in. For the Circle of the Crone one, for example, you might go in and be like, which cult do I want to run? What kind of a structure do I want to use? Do I want it to be much more Wiccan, for example, or do I want to riff off of certain conspiracy theories about witches, for example, and use that as a basic structure? So, as I was just kind of alluding to, Circle of the Crone are the pagan covenant. They have a lot of options for kind of more magical rituals, and they have a just kind of an interesting take on witchcraft in a vampire game.
I really like the way of thinking of the covenants as there's sort of two axes. You have radical and conservative. You have secular and religious. And so the Circle of the Crone falls under their radical, but they are also religious. So they're kind of pairing with the Carthians in terms of like their mobility in the world of in the All Night Society, but they're more like the Lancare Sanctum in terms of like we are religious. So that's the contrast, right? And the Circle of the Crone they are about paganism, but they are also about like even more in some ways than the Carthians. You are free to be a vampire. Go out there, eat all the humans. Don't fall to the beast too far. That's not great. But the Mother Goddess loves it when you murder. Like that. Their thing is about like we are the primal predators of the night, and we should not hide that. And our goddess has given us blood sorcery to prove that. So I like to think of the Circle of the Crone as having kind of they share some DNA from the Sabbat in old Vampire the Masquerade, but a little more like concentrated in terms of not so much like you're not trying to awaken or you're not trying to find any gods that are coming down on you. Just that like you are free to be a vampire. You're not human anymore, but you are free to be a vampire, and here's how you be really good at that.
And that's a key thing is like they're not a mono myth in that respect. There are They are a recurring thing for some reason. Not every cult in every city has the same beliefs. They don't even have the same history. They are really in some respects, they're standalone constructs in the sense that they again, you've got groups of vampires that realize, or at least have a belief that they're apart, they're separate from the cycle of life within the world, and then they realize the best way of expressing this concept is through the idea of the child woman crone cycle of paganism.
Maiden mother crone,
yeah, there we go. And through that and through experimentation, they come up with their blood sorcery. So, they're in that respect, they within a city, you can actually have where the Circle of Crone cult dies out and then has a resurgence and has no continuity with the previous one. And other than they seemingly follow a few structures that are quite similar because cults are cults, and they have some powers which are very similar just because of the expression of Vitae through Kruak. They're really fun because of that. I really, really like them. I really like I think key of them is their philosophy about how they try to understand where vampires fit in the world, where they're outside the cycle of life.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on then, we've got the Invictus. So the Invictus are our classic lords of the dead. They have their feudal hierarchy. They like to have someone at the top, and they dish out prestige and hunting grounds to everyone below them. They've got some cool, I wouldn't say powers, but merits, the kind of abilities that tie into that. I really like the fact they've got their dynastic houses. So when one vampire sleeps, another one awakes, and this allows continuity. For most people, they're going to be the most similar to the Camarilla from Masquerade, but I still think they're quite distinct from the Camarilla.
They really are. I was going to say the big emphasis, and I keep going back to what's changed because that's just what's on my mind a lot lately. What I really like about the Invictus in second edition is they are the aristocracy of the night, but they are also the secret police of the night. They are there to tell you the Masquerade is the all-important rule of this society that we live in, and we are going to enforce it, and we're going to make sure you follow it. And that adds this level of certain kind of spycraft to the Invictus. You can play, the noble sitting up in his castle, but you can also play like the spy who came out from the cold, the vampire. This kind of grim creature wandering around the all-night society, making sure that everyone's acting like a human in just the way that the prince wants. And I think that's a really cool mode of play for a vampire game. Playing this, especially if you're a Ventru or a Maquette, you go out and maybe they don't even know your name. They just know you as you're the sheriff. That's all you are anymore. So that's one cool thing about the Invictus is that they have this level, this spycraft, but also combined with this conservative totalitarianism. I mean, not cool in a good way. Fun to play, fun to be horrifying.
I would also say, again, within the Invictus, I think you can do with the fact that there are other things within other books like minor cults that don't fit the Crone and don't fit the Lancare Sanctum. You can easily fit within the Invictus in a particular city. They may have their own cult or religion that they follow. So you can nest things within them. Just as we said, you could have Carthians which are actually quite religious or not religious, in the same way the Invictus could be like, no, we ban all faith, like they are totally secular and want the city that way, or actually have their own internal mythology that they adhere to. Again, you could look at them and go, they look like the Camarilla, but they really are not.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, the strength of Requiem, is you can really push this theme to be as strong as you like in that idea of how do you want to represent a feudal or at least a hierarchical system of control within a vampire society. there's no reason why the Invictus could not be a little bit more democratic if you wanted to, because democracy is about dishing out power through a rules-based system.
Have some democracy as a treat.
Maybe just their system is still too rigid for the Carthians. Okay, so the Lancashire Sanctum, as we've spoken of, we've alluded to their Christian laughers. No. But they are...
I'm going to keep that. I got to remember that one.
They're vampires which have a faith based around what is the role of vampirism within God's plan. And we use God in the big term, but they have an origin which likely predates Judaism. So you could possibly suggest even the Lancashire Sanctum go all the way back to the very early monotheistic faith of Akhenaten within Egypt, which mostly aligns them better with the history behind Theban sorcery, which is their kind of blood magic they have. But of course, they, through the eons, have obviously tried to reconcile how what they believe that they're doing fits within God's plan. So they see themselves as, I think, as by being vampires, they have been blessed rather than cursed to be the wolves
for you are damned.
Of being blessed to be the wolves of God. They are the ones which have been taken outside of the system to police the system of mankind, the system being souls, sinners. So within the Lancashire Sanctum, there are many different creeds. So again, how they want to interpret God's plan and how they fit within it. So there's the Westminster Creed. There'll be the I can't think of it, but there'll be the one which is basically the creed of Peter. Paul.
Yeah.
So you've got so you can also play them as actually. There's no reason why you can't play them as more monotheistic in the fact they may have beliefs that fit with the pillars of Islam, or they fit with more Judaism, but they are your monotheistic vampires who believe they're part of a plan.
I think
you could easily spread it onto. It doesn't have to be a monotheistic religion either, right? You can definitely use them with like Hinduism, particularly if you're focusing on like Brahma and Shiva.
Well, that is a cool thing about sort of the setting, is that things like Kuruk and Theban sorcery kind of crop up where they don't, Western vampires don't expect them, because like anyone, you assume, we're the only ones who had that revelation from God. And then you go off to, East India, things like that, and find, oh shit, all right, well, they know what we know. That's a problem. I was going to say, one of the way I kind of try to pitch the Lancashire Sanctum is because they kind of, read too closely, they kind of seem like Debbie Downers, like they're the no funners of the world of darkness. And I think that they are actually kind of the covenant you play if you want to play the really debauched character, because they're damned. Like their philosophy is, well, humans have grace. Humans can achieve grace. They can go to heaven. Us, there is nothing for us. We are absolutely going to hell, but we can carve out a really nice little swell piece of hell if we keep the sinners and the righteous in line, and which kind of also justifies them just not having any rules. Like whatever they do is justified by God. Like maybe that is a sin, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to hell anyway. So there is that sort of more like the Gothic kind of, the clubwear kid kind of thing for the Lancashire Sanctum. It's not all just Catholicism and midnight masses. There's always confession, mystic aspect. Sorry, go ahead.
There's always confession as well.
Yeah.
There's always confession, and there's always what is it where you Catholicism?
Scourging and
that, and what was it where you pay for
indulgences.
Indulgences. So you could definitely see indulgences working into the sanctified when the Lancashire wants to move in on a particular city.
Well, especially if your indulgence is feeding your ghoul to your bishop or something.
Yeah, and murdering other kindred when it's against the rules or the traditions, typically. Good fun. Mike, any comments on them?
No, I think you guys really covered it. It seems like they really grew since
the original
core book, because it was very much originally very much steeped in the Testament of Longinus and kind of like the early bits of Christianity, and it really expanded with the Covenant book and second edition as well.
I was going to say that the Covenant book for the Sanctified is, I think it's the first one they ever did, and so it feels very creaky. It hadn't quite gone through the growing pains. But I will say, as kind of a little recommendation, the Testament of Longinus is seriously one of the best books that was written for Requiem, first edition or second edition. It is like, it's all in world. There's no crunch or anything, but it's a great read. It's kind of a hilarious read, actually. But if you really want to understand this Covenant, I really recommend reading it. Like, you could polish it off in a day. Really, really good.
I need to get a copy then.
It's really fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, final Covenant to cover is the Ordo Dracul. So their background is the idea that Dracula was, Vlad Tepes was cursed by God. No one really knows, is sure which type of clan he got cursed to be a member of.
Could have been his own clan.
Their whole shtick is that they're not really religious, and they have some order, some structure, but also they're looking for evolution. So that's where they're the philosophical scientists of Requiem, in my mind. They are the ones which they are trying to understand the vampiric curse and grow beyond it, so it is no longer a limitation, or at least evolve the beast and evolve their powers so that not even their powers, because their abilities come from beyond disciplines, so that they can weather sunlight even. They are the ones which will keep little chantries, little organizations. Essentially, they create research labs, or they'll host like talks where they'll be experimenting on some vampire they've created purely to experiment upon. And so their main focus is the coils. The coils are fall into it. There's a few different ones that look at different ways of overcoming the limitations of the beast. So I don't know. I see them as the philosophical kind of scientist vampires in the sense, but scientists in that kind of very Victorian kind of sense, where it's not true science that they're doing, because obviously it borders onto the occult and so doesn't follow the rules of science.
I was going to say one thing about the Ordo Draculs. I had that little quadrant thing I brought up earlier, and they absolutely break that down. They're on the Z-axis. And it's the occulted Z-axis, because, as you kind of put it, Chris, that they believe in God, but they say, fuck you, God. They're progressive, but they have a very strict hierarchy. They want to evolve, but also, you don't go against the dragon in front of you, unless you can kill him, and that might be part of your work. I love the Ordo Dracul. I think Ordo Dracul are probably my favorite, because they're such a gonzo element of that Requiem. Like, there's nothing really like them in Masquerade, or even a lot of vampire fiction. And the Coils of the Dragon are such an interesting concept of like personal evolution, instead of just like, well, I go out and mind control you.
I think they actually do, until recently with V5. I think they do better. I actually think they better represent what I feel Tremere vampires should be doing.
I agree. I completely agree.
Which is a strong take, isn't it?
Oh yeah, we're dishing out the hot ones today. I was gonna say that there's a joke that in groups I've played with over the years, that water is wet, the sky is blue, and it's the Ordo Dracul's fault. It's always comes down to the dragons. It's always some dragon doing something he really shouldn't.
And they're the ones that have the greatest opportunity for crossover within Chronicles of Darkness, because they're looking for like the ley lines, the
worm's nests,
and the worm's nests are these loci where the ambient magical energy of the world coalesces. So these, of course, these loci, these worm's nests as they call them, are where they go to perform crucibles, where they they basically are channeling this energy into their bodies to change. Of course, who's going to be using these sites as well? Well, either they're going to be bloody haunted, great, or there's going to be werewolves there and spirits, or spirits on their own anyway, brilliant. Mages will be setting up shop there. Okay, that's fun. And quite likely anything else that has a reason to be sat on one of these ley lines and absorbing its energy for some reason. I mean, you know, a loci is a pretty good place for a Promethean firestorm to get started. So that's the other good thing. These guys are, I feel, have the strongest reason to have crossover with the grander Chronicles of Darkness.
Yeah, they make great antagonists too. Like the Ordo, it's Dragon's fault, but the Ordo Dracul just there's it's hard to guess where that's going to go just as a player. Like, what is this covenant up to? Because the others, not that they're flat or one note, but there's sort of there's a set idea of what their polities are, what their obsessions are, and the Order of Dracul can be like, well, I got news for you. So yeah, I love the Order of Dracul.
Now, given that I'm aware of we are definitely running out of time, I knew this would happen. Right, so we'll briefly say, within the game, there are many bloodlines. There are loads, and more than you would ever expect. The key factor in this is, and I would always recommend that you should definitely, if you're a storyteller for this game, pick up Dots Bloody Dots by Rose Bailey. So this is a wonderful book on the Storyteller's Vault, which essentially explains how they went about balancing all the disciplines within Requiem, mainly for second edition. Because the whole point about the disciplines in Requiem is that no discipline, as you go up the discipline tree for your chosen thing, no higher discipline invalidates the previous one. So it doesn't mean like, oh, Dominate 1 is now useless because I've got Dominate 3, which does Dominate 1, but more. They're always lower ones are always still useful. So that's important because, of course, Requiem allows you to also create bloodlines. It has a guidance rule system for creating your own bloodlines. So I think that's the main thing to say on that front. Yeah. Also, you should feel happy to make your own covenant if you want to. By all means, do so. Again, there are dead covenants. There are legendary covenants. There's 7, for example, who have different histories. There is the Belial's Brood, which, if you're going to use really like demon worshipping satanic vampires, by all means do so, but get the Covenant book for them because it has different versions of how you can interpret them. So that combined with things like Ashen Cults from Vampire the Masquerade Dark Ages series, combined gives you wonderful different ways to create these really like Gnostic or aesthetic cults that are trying to that are obviously trying to rationalize that they are these monsters within human bodies.
I was going to say, sorry, quick note. Belial's Brood in second edition is it's updated in Spilled Blood, and it's very different from the first edition version.
Oh, cool! I need to read that. And
I've always been interested in like, can you kind of have both? Because the original is this grand conspiracy of Gnostic Satanists, and the new version is like humanity, zero vampires who have regained their intelligence, and there's other things going on there too. But I'm interested in the idea, much like 7, are there just several different things that claim Belial's Brood for themselves, and that's just sort of like, that's a name that keeps getting taken up over the centuries.
Yeah. And then into this hot pot, of course, and this gets us into what do you do, what type of games are you running, we also have the Strix. So the Strix are kind of a bloodline, well, kind of a clan, kind of a covenant, kind of not, kind of are, but basically they are spirits that aren't quite like the spirits of werewolf or the spirits of mage, because they don't quite obey all the rules. But the thing is, they can possess vampires, they can possess dead bodies as well and animate them. And that means they can, and these bodies possessed, whether kindred or not, are vampires. They obey the rules of kindred, which means they can also embrace others. And this gets us into the very murky origins of the Ventru, the destruction of the Julii, and a wonderful segment of Requiem, which I've personally not played through, but I do think would be a really cool Chronicle. I would love to play it as a stream game, is to play Requiem based in the Roman age, which is Requiem for Rome.
Have you never played Requiem for Rome?
I've not. I would love to play through it.
It's
that
so
maybe
wonderful.
if you want to run it as a stream game for Dark Days Radio. That's
Well, I have.
out there.
I won't spoil anything. I have some plans for Requiem for Rome second edition. So
Ooh, okay. We should definitely do that.
we'll talk. We'll talk.
But given that's an established Chronicle that you can go out and buy, there's 2 books for it. So let's really focus on this last 15 minutes. What stories are we playing in Requiem? Like, what are we focusing upon? Just put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like any good role-playing game, there's infinite stories you can tell, infinite ways to play. But, this game does have rules, and I think those can really inform a lot of the kind of gameplay cycles that we have in the game. I think a really important one to highlight would be humanity, because it's definitely, people keep mentioning Vampire the Masquerade. It's different in Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition, because this attribute of humanity, which all of the vampire player characters and NPCs have, it shows. So vampires aren't human anymore. They're not. Okay, you're a blood-drinking creature that's dead. But it kind of shows how much you can fake being human. And, if you have very low humanity, you're very alien, strange, weird, take more damage from sunlight. But if you have high humanity, you're pretty good at faking it and kind of fooling people. But you're also kind of fooling yourself. And there can be natural vampire processes that happen, like just falling into torpor, which is going to sleep as a vampire for being knocked unconscious or being too old, and that will just reduce your humanity immediately because you realize that you're not human anymore. And these vampiric characters also need to work with mortal touchstones to be able to maintain that humanity. So you can definitely have games besides the vampire politics, maybe in like a small town with just a couple of vampire characters and just kind of exploring and doing the kind of social interactions between these non-human characters and these people in the town. So that can give you a lot of stories right there. Or that can just be a side plot to a more political game of Vampire the Requiem.
So what you're basically describing there is what I would call soap opera vampire to a certain extent. I mean, while we may go, okay, is that really exciting? Dealing with, remember that the exciting things in games happen when you shift away from the status quo. But in order to know what the status quo is, you're going to have to establish it. So doing these sessions, and whether it's a story or a vignette of your character interacting with their human touchstones, how are they making their money? How are they retaining their notion of what it is to be a human? How are they maintaining that friendship with that human touchstone? Is important for all the characters to do to establish their day-to-day life. Once we know what that is, we can reference it in a very quick way later on in our chronicles, but we need to know what it is.
Right.
And then we can return to it when we go, well, what happens when that gets, that interaction is at risk, when something goes wrong? And it can be as mundane as that touchstone realizes you're a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be really bad where that touchstone has been watched for months by mortal hunters or another vampire who hates your guts. So these touchstones, I think, are critical for establishing that as you said, Mike, that loop of gameplay, or that framework for it.
I love touchstones in both Requiem and Masquerade because it's a little gift to the storyteller where they can ask you, okay, players, how are you going to fuck this up? Like, it's such a great drama engine of having that relationship, even if it's a really horrible relationship. Like, most Ventru do not have great relationships with their touchstones because they're kind of sociopaths. but it's you're going to cling to that thing anyway because that's what's holding you to this world. And if you don't, you're turned into a bloodthirsty monster forever, and that's it. You're gone. I was going to say earlier that one thing I like about this game is that clan pushes you away from humanity, and the covenants, for all their horror, kind of push you back towards it. But humanity is not about morality. It's about how you behave. It's about how you navigate being this blood-sucking monster in a world of human beings. And that's a cool plot too, like figuring out how to place yourself in that awkward space.
Well, yeah, because like the rest of Chronicles of Darkness, with how we have the integrity, because that's how normal humans operate, you have breaking points, and that's essentially really just saying, establishing what bad things erode your vampire's ability to fake being human. So I think within that, obviously within one, you've got the everyday politics, because life is politics. You've got the everyday interactions between a vampire and mortals around them. That most probably is going to be about 60-70% of their interactions in a month. I think any sane vampire would only want to interact with other vampires on a infrequent basis, because obviously the other interactions are going to be really with your covenant and likely more likely your coterie. And while it was not considered one of the best Requiem books at the time, going back to it, I still think it's one of the strongest ones out there still, is the book Coteries. Because
spicy take.
This book actually gives you group templates for coteries that are either mono covenant coteries, or mixed coteries, or mono clan coteries. And it's by working out that template of who your coterie is that fits in, that enables and helps your storyteller work out what type of stories you as players want to play. So if you're going to be the fixers, the ones that go out, clearing up the mess, well, then that clearly means that you're less likely going to be a coterie that's creating the masquerade breaches, but you're the ones that are sent out to fix them.
You're the cleanup crew, yeah.
Yeah, or or maybe you're the ones which are like the researchers. So you're not going to have much, combat going on, but you're expected, because you're the ones that are turned to maybe by the Auto Dracul, to steal, borrow, discover ancient lore. And it's interesting again the fact that we have this book that looks at this. And we now have in V5 of all games, we have coterie types. So I think that's a really important aspect, is working out your group template for how you're going to play, because that also means you as a storyteller can go, well, okay, you're obeying the limitations I'm putting upon you, so I'm going to reward you with some things to enhance that type of story.
There's a lot of good stuff for that in Secrets of the Covenants for second edition. It's mostly covenant oriented, but there are interesting social merits on how to move between the different covenants and things, and how that affects your coterie. I was going to say, Chris, you mentioned stealing lore and stuff, and that kind of made me remember that I think Rose Bailey said this, that Vampire's kind of bread and butter plot is kind of the crime drama. Whether that's The Godfather, or whether that's Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Fangs, it's kind of, you can do heists, you can do, like I said, The Godfather, you can even do things like the Raid. But vampires often are criminals, and that is a really solid plot that you can plug into the game really easily. And if you want to weird it up with, maybe there's a Strix involved somewhere, or the Order of Dracul's experimenting on a Frankenstein's monster, things like that. But I think Requiem does that sort of, and going back to melodrama and things, it does that criminal element really well. I think probably the best of all the games. Maybe Hunter does crime pretty well too, but
yeah.
Cool.
Obviously, the other thing we haven't spoken about in this is disciplines, which really just fit into the type of stories that you're running. Because obviously certain kindred are able to do certain wonderful blood-based abilities, and so again, I guess within the sense of a crime drama or procedural kind of investigations, that allows you to work out why something's occurred, why has this murder happened this way, why is this important human dead and there's no evidence. So knowing about disciplines and how they work into that is important. Also, Mike, you've put several powers can inspire stories or shift the game, or was that your note?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was just kind of bringing up that disciplines going wrong can cause story elements that you wouldn't expect, like your dominate to wipe someone's mind conditioning, if you will, fails, and then you have to deal with that, or maybe you have to get someone else to deal with it, or there's a bunch of like psychotic breakdowns across the city, which have very nightmarish descriptions. So then your vampires who know about disciplines are like, could be the nightmare discipline, could be a rogue Nosferatu, or maybe it's something completely different.
I've sometimes said that cool powers should be, cool for your player, but they should also be plot hooks. Like they all have, elements of telling a story just about that discipline, whether it's nightmare or dominate, even the physical disciplines.
And one other thing I wanted to highlight about Vampire the Requiem is the fog of ages that exists, because one thing that happens in Requiem is that older vampires eventually will fall into torpor. They'll go to sleep for decades, centuries, etc. And then they don't necessarily remember what happened to them.
So this is actually changed in second edition.
Yeah,
this is one of the coolest things.
Changed in second edition, but I still like it. Okay. I personally still like it.
It's what's cool. Okay, so I'm a bit of an apologist for the Fog of Ages. I know that it wasn't everyone's favorite thing. Sure. So yeah, you'd fall to torpor and you wouldn't quite remember things about your life, and they more or less gotten rid of that in second edition, but it kind of follows from the idea. It's still sort of a thing in the sense that, like, I don't remember what I had for lunch on Tuesday, so I'm not likely to remember what I had for lunch 2,000 years ago. It's more that human memory is fallible. So vampires are like, yes, I met Martin Luther, but I don't really remember anything else from that time. Maybe, and human memories change and they shift as we recall them. So it's sort of still there, but it's not a magical curse. But it is, I mean, that is the cool thing about Requiem, is that the history is written by the vampires, and vampires are liars. That's the Fog of Ages.
Right. So no, that still works with the plot idea I was going for, where you have like a fallible memory still works. Where I don't know, like perhaps you could definitely have someone, maybe you had like a ghoul that was writing things down for you through the ages, and then they make little changes, and that messes you up, and you kind of realize that. Or maybe you realize that, eventually you just kind of realize that your touchstone that you have, this mortal that you've been talking to, you remember someone just like it in the past. And, you can kind of harken back, and maybe they'll remember, I ate the old touchstone. Whoops. And that kind of stuff, which will always be really fun to kind of play with as a storyteller, put those seeds in. Or maybe the player will come up with them themselves as well, which is definitely very delightful. Is there anything else we should talk about for like game concepts or exploring the game, or should we move on to just a little smidgen on crossover?
I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I mean, if you've played the first edition, there are obvious some changes. Predator's Taint is gone. Again, I didn't mind too much the idea of vampires, like just the innate beast kind of like getting its heckles up, but it was just I think the way it was written was not the way intended.
Yeah, Justin Achille has said that it was misinterpreted a lot, and I like so they have predatory auras now for people who have not read the new edition, where it's more like vampires can tell each other on sight because it's like lions walking into the same territory, and now they can lash out at each other and play games of dominance chicken. It's a little more active. It's not as passive as the Predator's Taint was.
Yeah, exactly. And then I can't think of anything else that was kind of like brand new. Otherwise, like that was a distinct difference. Revenants. Okay.
Yeah. Revenants are basically, so Vampire the Masquerade and Vampire the Requiem. It's never really been about you bite a guy and then he turns into a vampire. You have to make a deliberate choice. But in Requiem second edition, now you have to kind of be careful not to shit where you eat. Because sometimes if you kill a person, if you drain them of blood and they have a bit of blood in their system, or you've just, you've interacted with them a lot, they might come back as these things called revenants, which are sort of quasi-kindred like vampires that are just disastrously hungry. Every night they wake up with no blood in their systems, and the other thing about them is that they can find you really easily. They can start to track you down. So those are a really cool plot element. I wish we could go more into them, but I think we're running out of time.
No, that's cool.
Indeed.
The other thing you can do in the game is there are combo disciplines called devotions. Again, that's really fun. So we've spoken about the different things in game wise. So I think we've really expressed the fact that this game has a lot of scope for personal horror. You're not dealing with what I would call millennial horror. Millennial being like, oh, the end times are coming. It's more forgotten ancient evils, like oh fuck, we forgot that existed and having to deal with it, and also the ennui of just being a vampire. Like, oh, it's the same crap again. It's Tuesday, and Tuesday is like Tuesday 100 years ago. Yeah. Where someone's out to kill me.
They unearthed Steve, and Steve is mad about that.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, crossover. What can we do crossover-wise? We've already said the Auto Dragon has a lot of scope for crossover with the other groups within the World of Darkness. But what other crossovers can we look at?
I think the most obvious one, and it's kind of a cliche because of media and things, but I think werewolves are a really good crossover for vampires, because even though their spheres of influence are very different, they're both very invested in territory and hunting. Yeah. And occasionally werewolves do hunt humans. And I think that makes a kind of a cool clash of cultures. The reason that you hunt, because werewolves hunt because it's their sacred duty. Vampires hunt because gotta eat. And I think there's neat things you can do with that kind of play mode, especially because I think by default, the vampires and werewolves are one of the few monsters that actually do kind of recognize each other. Not specifically, but they can feel their auras coming off of each other.
Yeah, I think there's the rivalry between their innate bestiality, bestial nature clashes. Also, vampires by nature of hunting, and when things go wrong with vampires, again, like revenants or whatever other conflicts or just and so forth, taints the environment, and that has a reflection in the spirit realm, which is why werewolves get involved. So that's always good. My automatic go-to is the fact that the Meket, because we've alluded to, can do posthumous embraces, so they can essentially embalm a person and then embrace them at a later date. I think Meket are a wonderful go-to as being part of a mummy's cult, because two immortal beings, one of which doesn't have to sleep as often as the other, but the other one is massively powerful, and they have rituals and beliefs that have a lot of overlap. I think are great buddies.
Good friends.
Yep. And a Meket embrace going wrong could result in or something. So you could create a new lineage that way.
I was going to say, I wrote the Hypatians and Night Horse Spilled Blood, and that was kind of a way of getting Prometheans in on the action, because Prometheans are kind of hard to get into vampire, and I think they're kind of an interesting, or I mean, I'm tooting my own here, but they're an interesting way of bringing in that element of the Chronicles of Darkness, because their idea is that there's sort of like their weakness is that they have a very limited form of disquiet, and the pitchforks come out for them if they stick around for too long. And they sometimes hunt Prometheans because they can use them in potions and things.
Super neat. I like that. That's an awesome idea. Yeah, so I mean, as we mentioned, Chronicles of Darkness is pretty expansive. There's 11 major monsters that you can play as. And here for Signal Black, we're going to be covering all of the other games last Sunday of the month. So next up is Werewolf the Forsaken, which would be pretty interesting because that one changed a lot. With
edition.
Went from my least favorite game to one of my top 5.
Really?
Yeah.
We went from one of my top 5 to one of my top 5. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, so people can check that out. We'll put out all the notices on social media and the like. And for our social media, people can find us on Facebook with facebook.com/darkdaysradio, at Darker Days Radio on Twitter. We have a Discord, which you can find a link to in the show notes if this is on podcast form. And also just go to our website, darker-days.org. Sam, do you have any social media that you want to share?
Yeah,
any books that you've been writing that you want to share? Anything like that?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at the Third Duckman. It's a 3 not spelled out. I've got lots of books on Storyteller's Vault. I think I've got them linked in my Twitter if you seek that out. And I will say the book that Chris and I worked on for Requiem is Sin Again Deva. It's an update of the old clan book. It's got some really fun stuff. Chris did a wonderful job of updating the old Nemites Covenant from the Dance Macabre. Just all around a really fun book. And I think if you love the Deva, if you love Requiem, if you love Bloodlines, please check it out. Give me $2.
Excellent.
All right.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Sam, for helping us get
so
through
much.
all of that. We will mostly get you on again to talk about a different splat in the future. As Mike said, this is going to come out, these going out at the end of the month. So we've got a long schedule with this. I mean, if people really enjoy this and we can keep up momentum, we'll get through all of the game lines. And then eventually, I guess we'll start drilling down into some more specifics.
The weird
whatever those
stuff
will be. But yeah, thank you for watching. And we will see you next time in a month's time. So goodbye for now.
Hey everyone, this is Mike with a few quick updates to this episode. First off, the next episode in Signal Black is actually going to be just general Chronicles of Darkness. We have a scheduling conflict, so Werewolf the Forsaken will probably be bumped to the end of the introductory game rotation. So we'll probably see that in end of 2022 or early 2023. In addition to that, there is a war going on in Europe right now as Russia invades Ukraine. And the hosts of Darker Days are really sickened about this, especially with the atrocities and probable war crimes going on over there. So we're teaming up with a bunch of other streamers and podcasters to do the Roll for Ukraine GoFundMe. I don't have a link yet, but as soon as we have it, we'll be adding it to the show notes. And in support of that, Chris is going to be running a Soulbound game called Reap and Sow, which is going to be streamed in conjunction with Realm of Fire. One of the hosts, Rob, will be joining. And that will be occurring on Saturday, March 5th at 8 p.m. Greenwich time and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you don't want to wait to donate, you can definitely donate directly to the Ukrainian Red Cross to help people, get them blankets, food, water. In addition to that, you can also go and donate to the International Committee for the Red Cross. They have a Ukrainian page that we will link here. They do a lot of work getting water to individuals in Ukraine. As well, the International Committee of the Red Cross has a lot of other projects in other countries. So you can donate to Yemen, Afghanistan, the Tigray region of Ethiopia, and many other crisis points in the world right now. It's really important to give, so if you can do so, we here at Darker Days Radio really appreciate that. Thanks. This has been an episode of Darker Days Radio. Special thanks to Occam's Laser for the intro, outro, and new bumper music from their hit album, 9 Circles. Check out the rest of their work at occamslaser.bandcamp.com.